When I was 19, my brother sold my car behind my back to pay for my sister's husband's MBA. They said I'd understand one day. I didn't. But 15 years later, guess who walked into my office applying for a job at the Fortune 500 company I built from scratch? This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the quiet one stops staying quiet. Savannah, North Carolina was the kind of place wise cicadas sang lullabies in the heat, and the streets seemed to remember every story ever whispered beneath the shade of their moss-draped oaks. On Sycamore Street, in a modest two-story house painted sunshine yellow, the Bennett family lived a life that, from the outside, looked perfectly balanced. But inside balance had always been an illusion. Daniel Bennett was the youngest of three. He was born on an August afternoon while his father's Harold was watching a Braves game and his mothest Diane was 2 weeks early and slightly annoyed. His birth, like much of his childhood, arrived without fanfare. No cigars, no family photos, no parade of visitors. Just a quiet new soul laid gently into a world already revolving around Othis. Ashley, the eldest, had arrived like a trumpet blast, bright, confident, and already owning the room at age 3. People adored Ashley. Teachers raved about his leadership skills. Neighbors commented on his charm. His laughter could peel paint or open wallets depending on what he needed. Ashley was a natural storm, always swirling, always seen. Then came Marcus, 6 years older than Daniel, with a smile that disarmed most adults, and a way of talking that made even nonsense sound like strategy. Marcus had an affinity for economics and attention. He went off to college early, studied business, and could sell sand in the desert with a handshake. And then quietly, Daniel. Daniel didn't make demands. He didn't throw tantrums or chase spotlights. He liked quiet. He liked Bach and Beethoven and reading National Geographic under a blanket with a flashlight. While Ashley was performing in school plays and Marcus was pitching business ideas to their uncles at barbecues, Daniel was in the corner learning how cells divided or how a piano sonata could make his chest ache in the best way. "He's our easy one," Diane would say at church potlucks, ruffling Daniel's curls absent-mindedly while gushing about Ashley's debate win or Marcus's summer internship. Always content, never a problem. Daniel smiled through it. That label easy wasn't praise, it was dismissal with a bow. Birthdays were the most obvious divide. Ashley's 15th had been a production, a rented venue, a catered taco bar, a local DJ, and even a professional photographist. Daniel's 15th was remembered when Diane handed his erratic bundle of secondhand novels over breakfast, and Marcus muttered, "Oh yeah, happy birthday, kid," while scrolling on his phone. What Daniel lacked in celebration, he made up for in effort. At age 14, he started babysitting for the McAllisters down the street. By 15, he added tutoring younger students in math and science. At 16, he took a job at Pine and Petal, a cozy little flower shop owned by a widow named Myrtle, who taught his about zinnias and resilience. Every dollar Daniel earned was split into 2 coffee cans beneath his bed. One marked college, the Othis car. Ashley, meanwhile, floated through his final high school years with average grades but exceptional poise. Marcus, now freshly graduated and working in Atlanta, was the family's rising star. He'd come home in crisp suits, shaking hands with neighbors like a senator in waiting. He teased Daniel affectionately, but always from a place above his, like a mountain tolerating a stream. Then came Daniel's Mustang. It was Chisry red, faded in places with a scratch along the back bumper and 96,000 miles on the odometer, but it was his. He had bought it outright the summer before his senior year of high school, every cent coming from 3 years of Jason skipped fast food. He'd spent hours on Craigslist, researched V in histories, begged Marcus to teach his how to check the oil. When he slid into the driver's seat for the first time, a quiet pride bloomed in his chest. Not loud like Ashley's parties, not flashy like Marcus's business cards, but his. He named it June after the one person who always made his feel seen. Grandma June wasn't technically his grandmother's. He was Diane's aunt, widowed early and childless by choice, with a house that smelled like lavender and lemon bars. But Daniel had always thought of his as his real family. June listened when Daniel spoke. He asked questions that weren't small talk. He remembered what Daniel's favorite composer was, Debussy, and mailed his newspaper clippings about men in science with notes in the margins like, "This could be you one day." One summer afternoon, June sat with Daniel on his creaky porch swing and handed his a crisp $50 bill wrapped in a note. "Don't let the loud ones make you think you're not shining. Some stars burn quietly, but they still light the sky." That note lived in Daniel's wallet for years. High school passed in a blur of AP biology labs and early morning shifts. Daniel kept his grades perfect in his Mustang Polyhead. He'd drive it late at night, sometimes windows down, letting the North Carolina breeze tangle his curls while the radio played quiet indie ballads. That car was more than transportation. It was freedom. It was proof. He had done something hard. He had claimed something. It mattered, except to his family. At Ashley's high school graduation, Diane gave his a silver charm bracelet, with each charm representing a key moment in his life. Daniel's reward for getting a full scholarship to North Carolina Tech was a lukewarm, "That's great, honey," and a reminder to not forget to write thank you cards. Marcus was proud of his sort of not bad live, he'd said, slapping his back a little too hard. "STEM boys are hot right now. Tech is the future," as if he were an NFT. Daniel didn't argue. He never had. He simply packed his boxes, loaded June with his books, his piano heat music, and the new blender he'd bought on sale, and pointed the Mustang north. He didn't cry when his parents waved vaguely from the porch. He didn't look back when Ashley offered a distracted hug goodbye. But he did cry when he parked in the dorm lot at North Carolina Tech and sat alone in the car for 20 minutes before going inside. He cried because he was terrified. He cried because he was proud. He cried because Grandma June had left a care package in the trunk, a box of homemade cookies, a tiny potted succulent, and another note. "You already know who you are. Don't let them make you forget." In a world wise, Ashley sparkled and Marcus charmed. Daniel had learned to survive by being small, silent, and good. But inside his, fueled by piano keys, the hum of a Mustang engine, and the steady echo of Grandma June's words, something was waiting to break free, and one day it would. Daniel had always imagined freedom would smell like hot asphalt and coffee. His first fall at North Carolina Tech brought both. The city pulsed louder than Savannah ever had, busier, taller, a little sharper at the edges. But Daniel felt ready. He had June, his Mustang, waiting faithfully in the dorm parking lot. He had his schedule color-coded, his backpack stocked, his tuition paid with scholarship, and he had a quiet fire in his chest that whispered, "This is yours now. Don't mess it up." He was one of only 3 boys in his Biotech 204 lecture hall. The professor, a balding man in worn corduroy, referred to the class as gentlemen by default. But Daniel didn't flinch. He raised his hand anyway, answered questions with precision, and stayed after class to clarify formulas when Othis packed up early. This was no room for shrinking highs. His days were brutally full. He opened the campus coffee kiosk at 5:30 a.m., pouring foamed milk into biodegradable cups while listening to med students argue about enzymes. He dodged to class by 8, squeezing in granola bars between lectures, and clocked weekend hours at a campus lab assisting with glucose monitoring prototypes. At night, he collapsed onto his twin bed in a room he shared with a polite but aloof architecture major. Sleep became currency he spent sparingly. The Mustang, still named June, was his lifeline. He drove his to-work shifts, late-night grocery runs, even solo drives to the lake when campus walls closed in. June hummed reliably, his engine a metronome that steadied Daniel's scattered days. But nothing grounded his quite like meeting Jordan. They'd both reached for the last pack of peanut butter protein bars at the campus market, their hands colliding mid-air. "You have good taste," Jordan said, grinning. He was a second-year software design major with a sharp bob haircut and an expression that said he'd already seen through your bullshit. They clicked over sarcasm code and midnight ramen. Jordan lived off campus in a crumbling house with peeling yellow paint and a porch swing that moaned when it moved. He offered Daniel sanctuary study sessions on beanbags, venting over cold pizza, real laughter. It wasn't family, but it was something real. Jordan didn't expect Daniel to be okay all the time. He asked the right questions and didn't flinch at the answers. That October, during midterms week, Daniel missed a call from Marcus. His name flashing on his cracked screen still brought a strange mix of warmth and wariness. When he called back, he answered on the second ring. "Liv, been meaning to catch you." "You good busy?" he said. "But good." Marcus launched into a stream of updates, a new promotion, a golf tournament, and finally like dropping a pebble into a still pond. "Oh, and Jason just got into the Kellogg MBA program. Big win. Whole family's pitching in to support. Thought I'd loop you in." Jason. Daniel barely knew him. He and Ashley had gotten engaged the previous summer, all champagne and Instagram photos with sun-drenched filters. He was the kind of man who quoted Steve Jobs at brunch and introduced himself with both first and last name. Daniel had nothing against him per se, but he also didn't see why his graduate degree required his attention. Pitching in, how he asked, eyebrows raised. "Just helping wise we can. School's expensive," Marcus replied breezily. "Maybe you can visit this weekend, Mom misses you. We can talk it out. Talk it out." Daniel knew that tone. It was the family's favorite passive verb for make a decision you already agreed to, without knowing it. He said he'd think about it. That Friday, he packed June with laundry and leftover lab snacks, letting Jordan swipe one of his hoodies in exchange for a borrowed charger. The drive home was quiet, just as the hum of tires and a building knot in his stomach. When he turned onto Sycamore Street, a strange stillness prickled his skin. Something was off. The driveway, usually cluttered with his David's aging minivan and his Mothis's garden equipment, was emptier than usual. His usual parking spot, Hiss Always Hiss, was vacant. He blinked, parked on the street, walked up the porch steps with his pulse quickening. Inside, Diane was stirring something in the kitchen, the scent of garlic heavy in the air. Ashley laughed loudly in the dining room, seated next to Jason, who wore a crisp button-up and the smug glow of new success. Marcus was on the couch, watching a football game with one eye. "Wise is June?" Daniel asked. The room stilled. The knife in his mother's hand paused mid-chop. Jason cleared his throat, looked away. Diane's voice was too light. "Oh, honey. We sold it." The words didn't land at first. Daniel stood, this blinking, waiting for the punchline. "You what?" "We sold the car," Marcus said, eyes still on the TV. "Jason needed some help with tuition. The Mustang wasn't really being used." "I drive his every day," Daniel said. His voice cracked on the last syllable. "He's my car." Diane gestured vaguely. It was under Marcus's name for insurance purposes. He made the payments official. Official. The word felt like betrayal dressed in paperwork. "I paid for that car with 3 years of work. Babysitting, tutoring, flower shop shifts. That was mine." Jason murmured something that sounded like, "Thanks, I guess," but Daniel didn't even look at him. "You had no right," he said, staring directly at Marcus now. "No warning. No call. You just took it." "It was for the family," Diane said like that, explained everything. But it didn't. Because it had never been for Daniel. Not the praise, not the parties, not the Mustang. They had taken the one thing he had claimed for himself and given it away without blinking. Daniel turned without another word, walked back outside. The street was darker than he remembered. The wind colder. He called Jordan from the sidewalk, his fingers shaking. "They sold my car," he whispered. "They sold June." Jordan's pause was just long enough. "Then come home." Back in Atlanta, Daniel sat at his desk that night and stared at his empty Google Calendar block titled Sunday Grocery Run, June. He deleted it. He started walking more, took buses that didn't match his class schedule, Mr. Ed shifts, got blisters, ate less. But something else bloomed in the cracks. A decision. From now on, his life would be his again. No shared names on titles. No blind trust. No quiet sacrifice. They hadn't just taken a car. They had taken his metaphor for freedom. His proof that he mattered. And Daniel Bennett would make damn sure that what came next was something no one could sell. For the first time since he'd left home, Daniel woke up late for class. Not a little late, fully late. His phone had died overnight, the charger frayed from years of wear. His backup alarm had been the Mustang's dashboard beep, which of course no longer existed. He sprinted down the stairs of his dorm, barefoot, hair-wet binder pressed to his chest, only to miss the 8:15 bus by 15 seconds. He stood this panting, the cloud of exhaust disappearing down the hill, and felt something raw snap in his chest. This had been no goodbye for June, no closure, no way to prepare for how much a car could mean when your entire life hinged on moving through space on time. For the next 2 weeks, Daniel's schedule crumbled. The bus system ran on an unpredictable rhythm, seemingly immune to logic or punctuality. Sometimes he waited in the cold for 40 minutes. This times the driver closed the door in his face as he approached. He missed a shift at the lab. Then 2. His supervisor gently reminded his that the internship required reliability. He missed a coffee shop shift and was taken off the schedule for the next month. "We need people who can get his Daniel," the manager had said, eyes apologetic but firm. Food became an afterthought. He rationed peanut butter and packets of ramen noodles, drawing little smiley faces on each package like tiny soldiers in a hopeless war. Dinner became an act of irony, boiling water, numb hands, rage bubbling under the surface. He bought a cheap spiral notebook at a campus supply closet and labeled the first page, "The Days Without Mustang." The entries started as practical times of missed buses, shifts lost. How long it took to carry groceries 3 miles in the rain. But slowly the writing changed. It became personal. Day 11. I am not efficient anymore. I am fragile in public. I cry on sidewalks. Day 16. A car is not just steel and gasoline. It is dignity. It is permission to say yes to the world. Day 22. I used to glide through life's cracks. Now I fall into them. He didn't show anyone the notebook. Not even Jordan, who brought his takeout and offered to drive his once a week to Target for essentials. Jordan didn't ask for the full story, but one night over lukewarm chow mein, he said, "You look like someone lit you on fire and told you to walk it off." Daniel laughed, a sound that cracked at the edges. One morning, 3 weeks into the Mustang's disappearance, Daniel fainted. It happened on campus between his biology lecture and the biostatistics lab. He hadn't eaten anything except half a granola bar in 24 hours. The room spun, the floor tilted, and he went down like a puppet with its strings cut. He woke up in a nurse's office, IV in his arm, the smell of antiseptic too familiar. A nurse offered his a bland sandwich and a worried look. "You're severely dehydrated," the nurse said, "and underweight. You need to slow down." Daniel nodded. He didn't say that slowing down wasn't an option, that his scholarships depended on perfect grades, that work paid rent, that sleep and food were luxuries he bartered like trinkets. Later that day, an email arrived, a warning from the scholarship office. His class participation had dropped. Another's flagged absence could trigger a formal review. It was enough to break his open. That night he called Grandma June. He hadn't planned to. He hated sounding weak. But when June answered, his voice crackly with age and gentleness, Daniel broke. "They sold my car," he whispered. Silence on the other end. "Then I know, sweetheart." Daniel sucked in a breath. "You knew your Mothis mentioned it. I told his it was a mistake. But they don't always listen to me. It was mine. Every dollar. I remember the first time you drove his to my house. You parked crooked, got out like you'd won a war." Daniel laughed through his tears. June's voice softened. "Listen to me, Daniel. You are not what they took from you. You're what you've built despite them." That night, Daniel received a Venmo alert. $1,000 from June Warner Freedom Fund. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. Enough for 3 months of groceries, bus fare, backup chargers. Enough to give his room to breathe. He used part of it to buy a new pair of sneakers. His old ones were so worn they let in rain like open windows. He bought actual vegetables, a new planner, a weighted blanket. He wrote in his journal, day 33. "A man can lose everything and still not lose his self. That's the math they never taught us." That spring, Daniel met with his academic advisor and restructured his schedule. Fewer labs that required cross-campus travel, more data-driven projects he could do from a single building. He started tracking his boundaries with the same precision he once reserved for glucose monitoring code. Sleep was logged. Meals were scheduled. No calls home during midterms. No just helping out unless he chose to. He was done giving away parts of his self to keep this comfortable. One night as finals loomed, he sat with Jordan on the porch steps of their favorite all-night diner. The stars were soft above Atlanta. The wind smelled like fried oil and hope. "I'm not over it," Daniel said. "The car, my family, all of it." Jordan nodded. "You don't have to be. I used to think being strong meant taking it. Now I think it means drawing a line." Jordan bumped his shoulder. "Took you long enough, Bennett." Daniel smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. He went home that night and stuck a post-it on his mirror. "Never let anyone own your freedom again." He would remember it for years. Summer arrived in Atlanta not with gentleness, but in a wave of heat that pressed itself against every surface. It curled paint off fences and made Daniel's skin stick to lecture hall chairs. But to his, that summer air tasted like possibility. He had landed a paid summer internship at Medavance Solutions, a mid-sized medical technology company housed in a glass building that looked like it was trying very hard to impress the Fortune 500s across the street. Daniel didn't care about the architecture. He cared that someone had chosen his on merit. His first day felt like entering a new dimension. Key cards, conference rooms with too many acronyms, engineers who spoke in clipped, caffeinated sentences. His manager, Dr. Ivan Chow, was gruff and brilliant, a man who rarely smiled but always noticed effort. Daniel started with documentation, testing logs, system summaries. But within 2 weeks, he began suggesting micro-adjustments to the firmware code for wearable monitors. Small tweaks, but precise. He stayed late, asked questions. Dr. Chow noticed. One Friday, as the team reviewed failed prototypes of a cardiac patch sensor, Daniel quietly raised his hand. "Why don't we separate the data transmission from the wearable itself?" he said. "Have the sensor collect but use a central node nearby to handle encryption and send to cloud. It could reduce heat issues." The room fell silent. Ivan looked at his like he'd spoken in Latin, then nodded once. "Write it up. I want a feasibility brief by Tuesday." He did. It turned into a pitch. The pitch became a proposal. By July, his idea had been selected as one of 3 Medavance would enter into the National Collegiate Innovation Conference. Daniel would present it, alone. It felt surreal standing under the fluorescence laptop in hand, explaining his design to people who looked at his not as a boy trying to keep up, but as an equal. For once he was seen not for his silence or for his resilience, but for his mind. And then Marcus called. It was a Tuesday night. Daniel had just returned from the lab, his backpack heavy with code printouts, when his phone buzzed. "Hey kiddo," Marcus said, his tone too casual. Daniel leaned against his apartment's brick wall. "What's up? I heard about the project. Mom mentioned it." "That's really great, Liv. You're doing awesome." He waited. Marcus sighed. "Look, I know things got tense with the car, but it's just a car, right? Jason needed a hand. He's family's future." Daniel closed his eyes. "And I'm what? The past? No. You're strong. We just thought you'd be okay." This it was again. That terrible compliment dressed as a dismissal. He exhaled. "I need you to hear me. It wasn't just a car, it was freedom, and you took it. You all did." A pause. "You're angry." "No," he said. "I've been angry. Now I'm building something you can't touch." He started to speak, but he hung up. That night he moved the rest of his things from campus housing into Jordan's spare bedroom. It was barely 10 by 10, the walls thin, the floor creaky, but it was his. "Clean break," he said to Jordan. "No more being tied by guilt or obligation." Jordan handed his a mug of coffee. "Burn the lifeboat. Swim forward." They stayed up until 2 a.m. reworking Daniel's resume. Jordan was ruthless in the best way. Cut the modesty, lead with that project, add metrics, say you led, not you assisted. They redrafted his personal statement. They policed his GitHub. They laughed when Daniel couldn't remember the last time he bragged about himself. By the end of August, Daniel had applied to Athena Tech, one of the most competitive medical AI companies on the East Coast. He had no connections, no inside scoop, just his grit, his bruised pride, his rebuilt resolve. When the confirmation email arrived, application received, he didn't cry. He just turned to a fresh page in his notebook and wrote, "Success doesn't start from zero. It starts from your first scar." And Daniel Bennett had earned his. The first thing Daniel noticed about Athena Tech was the silence. Not the absence of noise, but the kind of tense, buzzing quiet that only exists in spaces where too many brilliant people are trying to outpace each other to the top. The offices were sleek and open with glass walls and the smell of fresh coffee and ozone from the server room. Desks lined up like runways. Daniel stood awkwardly by the reception on his first day, wearing his best blazer and flats that pinched his toes. It took 30 minutes before anyone noticed his. That set the tone. Athena Tech was a machine powered by caffeine code and quiet aggression. It ran 24/7, fed by ambition and funded by healthcare giants eager to automate diagnoses and patient tracking. It was wise dreams went to be broken down into algorithms. Daniel had never felt more invisible. Most of his team were men, young, fast-talking. They name-dropped conferences and startups over lunch and high-fived over debugging wins. They didn't see his. Or when they did, it was through the lens of surprise, Python, or "You were on the Metavance pitch," he responded by doing what he'd always done, outworking them. He arrived before sunrise and stayed long after most had gone home. He volunteered for everything. Took notes no one asked for, rewrote documentation, built tools for teammates too lazy to automate their own tasks. And it worked for a while, but burnout is quiet. It sneaks up like a slow leak. First he skipped meals, then sleep, then weekends. His eyes developed a constant twitch. His chest felt tight. He started dreaming in syntax errors. The day his nose bled on his keyboard mid-debug, he finally went to HR. That's when he met Claire Evans. Claire was a director, one of only 3 men in the upper floor. His name was rarely said aloud without a note of awe. He was in his mid-40s, wore power suits like armor, and had a voice like velvet covering steel. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair in his office. "You look like you've fought 3 battles today." Daniel sat. His hands trembled slightly. Claire didn't smile. "You're trying to prove yourself, I get it. But here's the thing, Athena Tech rewards results, not martyrs." Daniel opened his mouth to explain, but Claire held up a hand. "I read your project logs. I see the code commits. You don't have to sell me on your talent. You do have to stop working like you have something to apologize for." Daniel swallowed. "I'm just trying to keep up." "Don't," Claire said. "You're not highs to keep up. You're highs to build. Work smart, not just hard. And more importantly, build allies. You can't do this alone." It felt like being handed a life raft. Claire connected his with a small mentorship circle men. Across departments who met monthly for lunch in the corner conference room while they locked the door and spoke freely. They shared strategies, job offers, warnings. They taught Daniel that strength didn't mean silence. With their support, he pitched a pilot for an AI-driven patient navigation platform, one that could track hospital intakes, predict bottlenecks, and redirect patients based on severity and wait times. It was bold, risky. Claire signed on as co-sponsor. The development was brutal. The first model failed twice. Daniel's team doubted his. His project manager tried to redirect the initiative to another engineer mid-cycle, but Daniel held on. He revised the model, added anonymized patient history filters, used NLP to analyze triage notes. When the demo went live, hospital administrators gasped. The software predicted a critical shortage 2 hours before the human team had seen it. The project was greenlit for pilot testing in 2 state hospitals. A week later, Daniel received an internal email with a simple subject line: "Offer pending full-time position. Athena Tech AI Division." He read it 3 times before breathing. Later that night, he called Claire. "I accepted," Daniel said, voice shaking. "It's real." Claire's voice warmed. "Of course it's real, but highs is what matters now. Don't climb alone. Bring this with you." Daniel didn't notice the promotion email at first. It sat quietly in his inbox between a weekly sprint update and an automated system alert. He almost deleted it until he saw the subject line: "Offer Director of Product, Athena Tech AI Division." He clicked, then blinked, then reread the message in its entirety 3 times over. At 29, Daniel Bennett had become one of the youngest directors in Athena Tech's history. The title came with a corner office, a hefty raise, and a team of 30 engineers who would now look to his for direction. But more than that, it carried weight, the kind his last name never had growing up. He sat in his office alone that evening, overlooking the twinkling lights of downtown Atlanta. His fingers hovered over his phone, almost dialing Jordan, almost messaging Claire, almost calling his parents. But the past always found its own way back. 2 days later, Marcus called. "Liv," he said, tone carefully neutral. "Hey, I heard the news, Director." "That's... wow. I mean, we always knew you had it in you." He didn't reply. He cleared his throat. "Listen, things have been rough. Ashley and Jason, they're separating. He got laid off. He moved back to Mom and David's for now." Daniel stayed silent, his jaw tightening. And Jason, Marcus continued. "He's thinking about applying at Athena Tech. Something in strategic planning. With his MBA and all, it might be a good fit." This it was, the ask. "Then he can apply through HR like everyone else," Daniel said, measured. Marcus sighed. "Come on, Liv, can't you at least talk to someone? Put in a word." "No," he said, sharper now. "He can build something for himself. Or not, but I won't be the shortcut." He hung up. 2 weeks later, a stack of resumes arrived on his desk from HR, part of a routine review for a new strategy initiative his division was funding. Daniel sifted through the first few clean professional measurable. Then he saw it. Jason A. Westfield, MBA, formerly of two now-defunct startups, gaps in work history, a cover letter riddled with jargon synergy, cross-functional optimization, value-added frameworks. It read like ChatGPT on autopilot. He leaned back in his chair. The same man who had sat beside Ashley while his Mustang van-eyed from the driveway now sat metaphorically across from his again, this time asking for access into a space he had bled for. Daniel didn't say anything to his team. He didn't delete the resume either. Instead, he highlighted the line that claimed 15 years of leadership experience and wrote a quiet note to HR. Please verify dates and role accuracy. He wasn't being petty, he was being fair. Jason hadn't built anything. He'd ridden on degrees, connections, and assumptions. Athena Tech didn't run on assumptions. Later that week, during a panel discussion with incoming interns, one of the students asked his what matters more, credentials or character. Daniel looked out at the sea of bright faces and said evenly, degrees open doors, discipline keeps them open. He thought of his bike rides to class in the rain, of the lab shifts, of his trembling hands during all-nighters and the betrayal that began it all. Then he added, never mistake access for merit, and never assume someone owes you success. The executive conference room on the 24th floor wasn't designed for emotion. It was glass, steel, and control, every edge sharp, every chair calibrated. Daniel had conducted dozens of interviews in that room. None felt like this. Jason was scheduled for 900 a.m. sharp. He arrived early like always, set 2 water glasses on the table, straightened the stack of printed resumes even though he knew them by heart. His was a posture of precision, but his chest held the old heat, the kind that rose from childhood betrayals and unsaid apologies. At 8:59, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Westfield is his. He didn't flinch. Send him in. Jason entered in a blazer too tight around the shoulders and a nervous smile that faltered when he saw his. Daniel, he said, stopping just past the threshold. I didn't realize you'd be. He gestured to the seat. Have a seat, Mr. Westfield. He sat, fumbled with his folder, cleared his throat. I appreciate the opportunity, he said. I know the HR route is competitive. We review every candidate based on merit and fit, he said evenly. Let's begin. They went through the motions first. His job history, key initiatives, leadership roles. Daniel asked the same questions he asked every applicant. Jason's answers were a medley of vague deliverables and buzzwords, drove results, leveraged insights, enhanced synergy. He pewed for specifics. What was the budget for that campaign, roughly? 6 figures, I think. How many direct reports? Fluctuated. It was a dynamic structure. He made notes. His confidence began to leak like air from a punctured tire. Then he turned a page, looked up. Jason, he said, his voice quieter. Do you remember the Mustang? He blinked. What? My 2003 Mustang, he said. Chisry red. Bought it after working double shifts for 2 years. You and Ashley sold it while I was at college. His mouth opened, then closed. Color rose in his face. That was Ashley's idea, he said too quickly. Your parents said it was in their name. I thought it was for school. My MBA. It was supposed to help us all. Daniel held his gaze. You never asked. You never apologized. You left me with nothing. I didn't know it meant that much to you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course not. Because for you, things were always this. Cars, money, degrees. You assumed the world would catch you. Jason shifted in his seat. Look, I get it. I've made mistakes. I've been dependent, lazy even. But I'm trying now. I really am. That's good, he said. But trying isn't a qualification. It's a beginning. He leaned forward, voice almost pleading. I need this job, Daniel. I'm out of chances. And I built my chances from nothing, he said, standing slowly. You see a title and think it can save you. But titles are earned, not owed. You've treated life like someone else's elevator. His eyes dropped. I didn't come as expecting a favor, he mumbled. I just hoped you'd understand. I do, he said softly. More than you think. Jason looked up. I understand what it's like to be desperate, to be overlooked, to be powerless, he continued. But I also understand that forgiveness doesn't mean reinstating trust. It doesn't mean granting access. Sometimes it just means I no longer carry the weight of your choices. He said nothing. He picked up his resume, held it for a beat, then placed it in the outbox stack. HR will be in touch. If they choose to proceed, it will be with another's team. A long silence filled the room. Jason stood slower this time. Thank you, he said, voice cracked at the edges. Daniel didn't nod. He didn't follow him with his eyes. He waited until the door clicked shut and then sat again, exhaling long and slow. He had imagined this moment for years, the confrontation, the catharsis, the final word. And now that it had come, this was no eruption, no dramatic triumph, just space. Inside is something uncoiled. It wasn't forgiveness for him. It was freedom for his. Daniel never liked hosting. He preferred clean lines, quiet dinners, no mess. But tonight, everything about his Buckhead loft was personal. The table set for 5. The lights dimmed to soft amber. A chef-prepared dinner not lavish, just intentional. No celebration, no decorations, no music, just honesty. His family arrived, scattered. Marcus first, awkward in the entryway, his parents next, holding a pie like it was armor. Ashley last, wearing grief on his face like makeup he didn't know how to remove. They sat around the table in silence, eyeing the lamb, the roasted squash, the untouched wine glasses. Eat, Daniel said gently. We'll talk after. They did, slowly, forks scraping plates. Small talk about Atlanta's traffic, the weather's how. Grandma June would have loved the tart. When the plates were cleared, Daniel stood. He walked to a side cabinet and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Its corners frayed, pages faded. He set it on the table. What's that? His mother's asked. My journal, Daniel said. The one I kept after you sold my car. Silence. Ashley flinched. Marcus shifted. Their fathers looked at his wife, then down. I don't want guilt, Daniel said. I want truth. He opened the journal and read day 4 without the Mustang. Mr. Ed class, walked 2 miles to work. Rain soaked my only shoes, no one noticed. He turned a page. Day 19. Burned out. Failed a quiz. Slept in the library. Dreamt of leaving and never telling anyone why I'd gone. He paused, looked around the table. I needed help. Not silence. Not assumptions that I was okay because I didn't scream. His mothers blinked back tears. We thought you were strong. I was, Daniel said, and exhausted and invisible. Ashley looked up, eyes red. I thought the MBA would fix things. For Jason. For our future. You never asked what it cost me, Daniel said. You never thought it was mine to lose. Ashley's voice broke. I was selfish and scared, and I leaned on everyone because I didn't know how not to. Their fathers cleared his throat. You were always our steady one. We didn't see what that steadiness was costing you. Daniel stared at him. That's the problem. You only saw what I could carry, never what I dropped to carry it. Marcus finally spoke, voice low. I was wrong too. I stood by, said nothing. He turned to him. Why, I guess I believed the myth, that you were fine, and if you weren't, I didn't want to admit I failed you too. They sat in silence. For the first time, Daniel felt the room expand not with noise but with truth. The fracture wasn't gone, but someone had finally reached inside it. His Muthus reached across the table. We can't undo what's been done, but if you'll let us, we'd like to learn how to be better. Daniel looked at the journal, then at their hands, their faces, the people he had waited his whole life to hear from. You can start by listening, he said, and not trying to fix. Ashley nodded through tears. Marcus placed a palm on the table, fingers open. Their Fathus whispered, "Thank you for not shutting the door." Daniel closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer. The ceremony was small, a modest lecture hall at North Carolina Tech. No stage lights, no press. Just rows of plastic chairs, a worn podium, and 5 nervous scholarship recipients waiting in pressed shirts and borrowed blazers. Daniel stood behind the podium, a crisp teal blazer over dark jeans. His voice steady. This scholarship, he said, is not about GPA. It's not about polyhead resumes or perfect paths. It's about grit, about choosing to show up when no one's watching. Behind his, the slide read, "The Four Wheels Foundation," named not for a vehicle but for the metaphor it had always been. Freedom, forward motion, something no one could take again. He stepped down as a young man named Camille approached the microphone. 17, wiry, nervous, a first year studying biomedical software. My mom used to clean the lobbies of Athena Tech. Camille said, voice wavering. He always said someone in this building was building miracles. I didn't think he meant me. But now, I think he did. Daniel blinked fast. The moment stitched something back together. After the event, he stood outside watching students file out with folders and thank you notes. A familiar voice called behind his. "You're still allergic to big parties, huh?" He turned. Jordan was leaning against the doorframe, suit slightly rumpled, grin unchanged. Always, Daniel smiled, but this one felt worth it. Jordan had left Athena Tech the previous year to co-found a health tech startup focused on remote diagnostics. And last month he'd asked Daniel to come on as strategic partner. Equal ownership, shared vision. They hadn't hesitated. "Let's go grab coffee," Jordan said. "We need to finish the UX flow and I refuse to do it over Slack again." "In a minute," Daniel said. He walked to the parking lot. His new car, if you could call it that, was parked near the back. A 2003 Mustang, Chisry red, slight paint fade on the right panel. Same scratch under the door handle like fate remembered. But this time the title was in his name, the keys in his hand. He ran his fingers over the hood, the metal warm from the sun. It wasn't nostalgia, it was reclamation. He climbed in, rolled down the window, and let the breeze hit his face. Back then, the Mustang had been his escape. Now it was his monument. He turned the ignition. The engine purred familiar and defiant. The upright piano in the common room hadn't been tuned in years. But Daniel didn't mind. Its ivory keys were chipped at the edges, the wood frame worn smooth by decades of hesitant hands. It looked a little like the one in his family's garage, the one Wise he had first learned to play. He sat on the bench slowly. His knees creaked in a way that made his laugh a little. Time did that. The room was quiet except for the soft wheeze of oxygen machines and the occasional clink of daihees from the dining hall down the corridor. A few residents in wheelchairs turned to face his, their eyes cloudy but warm. This was the assisted living home Wise Grandma June had spent his last 2 years. Daniel hadn't been back since the funeral, not because he didn't care, because he cared too much. Every hallway was heavy with memory, but today was different. Today he came with intention. A bouquet of peonies, Grandma June's favorite, rested beside his. A staff member had placed a framed photo of the two of them on the top of the piano. Daniel smiled at it now. June had always known, always seen his. He took a breath, then began to play. The Moonlight Sonata flowed from his fingertips, slow and imperfect. His hands weren't as fast as they used to be, but his heart was stronger. Every note was an echo of pain, of triumph, of growth. It was a song stitched with every day he walked in the rain. Every night he fell asleep over textbooks, every morning he rose anyway. Halfway through the second movement, a little boy appeared at the doorway. 7, maybe 8, with tangled curls and a juice box in hand, likely visiting a grandparent. He crept closer, wide-eyed, then asked softly, "Are you the lady who lost his car?" Daniel's hands paused on the keys. He looked at the child. Something about the question made his heart twist, but not in pain, in clarity. "Yes," Daniel said, smiling gently. "I once lost it." The boy tilted his head. "Did you get it back?" Daniel turned to the piano, laid his fingers down again. "I didn't," he said, "but because I lost it, I found myself." The boy blinked like trying to solve a riddle, then nodded like he understood. He stayed quiet, listening. Daniel finished the piece. The residents clapped soft and slow. A nurse wiped his eyes. He stood, bowed lightly, and kissed his fingers, then pressed them to the photo of Grandma June. Later that afternoon, he walked back to the parking lot. His Mustang, waited under the shade of an old oak. He slid into the driver's seat. The engine started with that familiar growl. He placed his hand on the gear shift, paused, and looked in the rearview mirror. Not at what was behind his, at himself. And this time he whispered, "No one's ever touching my keys again." He pulled onto the road, wind curling through the open window. This time he wasn't driving away from anything. He was heading home.